G'day folks and welcome to Wellywood Wargaming. It is a beautiful, beautiful day in the sun here in Sydney, so I thought I'd better get out in my garden and show you how I go about painting my Necromunda Zone Mortalis tiles. Now the rules for this video apply for every bit of scenery that I do pretty much in some way, shape or form. I've got a miniature tile here and I do this process on all the other stuff as well, so stay tuned for some interesting and very messy, arty painting styles here. First things first, let's try and avoid priming my washing on the line off camera to the left. We're going to use a spray here though and sort of face away from the laundry, Damon. Face away from the laundry. We're going to spray that liberally all over with some Mechanicus Standard Grey, a Games Workshop paint. In fact, I think the only Games Workshop or Citadel paint I'm using in this video. The next one is going to be Vallejo Model Colour, and this one is Light Sea Grey. Now I discovered this colour quite a while ago and hadn't been able to use it very successfully in the way that I'd like on some of my miniatures. However, when using this on scenery, I've been really happy with the results. It is a very cool sort of muted blue grey, or even almost like a dove grey, as you can see here. Of course, applying this pretty liberally onto this miniature tile here. I'm going to do at least 2 coats here because this is not particularly good covering paint generally. It's okay, but I think you're going to need to really get at least 2 coats onto this. The advantage of doing this out in the garden as well, if you do have some sunshine like I do here in Sydney, is that it dries incredibly quickly. In fact, everything dries very quickly out here. So doing it in the garden, this is now my workshop is in the garden, and I really love it actually. So this is the second coat here. It's already dried at this point, and we're just going to go in and blotch some more on in sort of fairly rough sort of technique really. I'm not looking at a smooth sort of blend all over. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit lumpy and chalky, that just further adds to the texture that comes out later on with some of the other products that I'm going to be using. Now you can use this kind of process on any type of Warhammer 40,000 sort of scenery, or even fantasy scenery if you like, but really the sort of grimy, grimdark effect that I'm going for here is best suited, I would say, for Necromunda, and I'm really happy with the results. I'd like to know what you think in the comments down below though, and please do, by the way, like, share, subscribe, and check out the Patreon as well. The next thing that I'm going to be using here is the secret weapon in a lot of people's arsenals here, and that is Dirty Down Rust. Now, Dirty Down make a bunch of different products. They do a verdigris, among others, but the Dirty Down Rust is just fantastic. I believe they do have several colours in this, but I think every single hobbyist out there should have a bottle of this and indeed know how to use it as well. Now, this stuff is water-based, or at least it's water-soluble, and it's activated with water as well. So I got the pot noodle out here, not for the noodles, just for the water, and representing the Bombay bad boy there. I'm going to just splotch this stuff all over. Now, again, my whole painting process is very arty. I'm a little bit, you know, I'm one of those creative types, I suppose. And, you know, I like to paint in very random, dirty, disgusting sort of ways. And I think that really lends to the grimdark sort of Necromunda aesthetic generally. But straight out of the bottle, what we're doing here is plopping a little bit of the Dirty Down Rust on, and you'll see what happens as this dries and is activated with more water as well. I put random, at least as random as possible, because it's actually really hard to be deliberately random, I've found. I'm going to put random sort of areas of this Dirty Down straight out of the bottle, and then I'm going to kind of soften the edges a little bit with adding more and more water directly onto those areas, and just kind of sort of almost stipple this stuff on as it's still drying. This is a good way of doing it. The other thing you'll notice me doing here as well is sort of tapping the top of my brush over it when it's quite heavily loaded with water, and that gives a sort of splashback effect, almost like a pebble dashing that you would expect after eating, indeed, one of these Bombay bad boys. The key here is not to go overboard. It's really easy to get a bit trigger happy with Dirty Down Rust because it's such a fantastic and fun paint to actually use. It's just so different to anything else on the market. It's really easy to go a little bit overboard with this, so I will not do that. I will restrain myself in this case, as I have with the rest of my terrain and tiles so far. I'm then going to get a little bit of kitchen roll here, or call it what you will in your different countries, but I've always called it kitchen roll. I actually went into Woolies the other day and asked for kitchen roll from a staff member, and they had no idea what I was on about. So I don't know what you call it here in Australia, but answers on a postcard, please. But yeah, splotching this around, just rubbing some of it in and just being deliberately kind of rough with it really is where we're going with this. I'm actually going to be using an absolute ton of kitchen roll here as well. So you will need extra kitchen roll because your missus might get angry if you've used it all. The next thing, and most importantly, is to take a little coffee break. An iced coffee in this case, in the sunshine, in my back garden, beautiful. I gaze at my work, I wonder what I can do next with it as I'm wearing man tights. Yes, I just came from the gym, so, you know, it's excusable, but take the piss out of me if you like. I can take it, I'm a big boy. Right, back to work then. Right, that's now dry. What we get from the dirty down rust here is really, really interesting. The areas where I've added less water, you'll see are darker, more sort of conventionally rusty. The yellower areas are the areas where I've added more water. So you can see the full effect of that really nicely once it's dry, and it just looks wicked. The next thing we're gonna do is hit the whole thing with a coat of very cheap, very easy to get hold of gloss varnish. You can get any type of gloss varnish, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's gloss. What this does is creates a barrier between what we've done so far and the next few products that we're going to be using here. Okay, so that's now dry in the sun. Didn't take long at all for that to dry, but it's always hard to tell if gloss varnish is dry because it always looks wet. But that's kind of the point. Anyway, you'll notice this adds a really nice protective layer. I can sort of rub it and scratch it a little bit with my fingernail. It's not going anywhere. The paint is fixed in there, and so is the dirty down rust, meaning that if I add any water to it, it doesn't change the effect of the dirty down rust. The next product we're going to use is a burnt umber oil paint. You can use any oil paint, but of course, the more you spend on it, the better it is. You know, oil paints, they do vary quite a bit. You can spend a shit ton of money on it if you like, but I don't. I tend to buy the cheap stuff because I'm doing it in bulk. I'm also going to use some odorless mineral spirits there, you'll see in the little pot. That is an old pot that I just keep on refilling with odorless mineral spirits. The reason why I use odorless ones is purely because I don't like the smell of normal mineral spirits, but it doesn't make it any better or worse. It's just easier to work with because you don't have that overpowering smell of your conventional white spirits. So here, and again, I know there's going to be plenty of you in the comments that are going to say, Damon, this is so wasteful. How could you add so much oil? Well, I'm just gonna because it's cheap and I don't care. I'm just gonna splotch it on in dots. I've got what, 9 dots here, and that's a lot of oil paint. You don't need this much. You can use a lot less. You could make the wash before doing this, but I just feel like for me, this works nicely. It adds a bit of texture, and it just gets the level of grime and filth that I really want in the aesthetic that I'm going for here. So dipping my big flat wide brush in the mineral spirits here, we're then just going to liberally just paint over all those areas of oil paint and just get it into all of the crevices and cracks and indents in this tile. Now this is a 3D printed tile, so that does have a sort of weird sort of texture to it. It's not plastic. Someone printed me this for my birthday, which I'm very, very happy about, so thank you for that. But you'll notice there is some added texture to this, which is quite nice. The only problem with it is it's very, very thin. It's not as thick as the plastic Necromunda tiles, so it is what it is. So just smush this stuff around. The more you smush it, the better. Get it into all of those little cracks and crevices. Now I could, if I was a bit of a pansy, I could use gloves here, but I'm not. I'm a tough guy, so I'm just gonna, you know, live with the fact that it looks like I may have wiped my own bum with my hands and forgotten to use tissue paper for the next few days. It's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. Most people that know me know that I am a nerdy hobbyist, and that's just fine. Usually the paint colors on my hands are not the color of poo, so yeah, that can be a problem. If you do happen to get oil paint on your hands, it is fairly easy to get rid of. You can use more mineral spirits to get rid of it if you like. Or conventionally, you could just use some dishwashing liquid, which does do quite well to cut through the grease, but sometimes it just sticks and it won't go. And you could use Swarfiga, which is something that I think you know, mechanics and greasers use on their hands. I think it's called Swarfiga. It used to be back in the 80s anyway. If you can still get that stuff, it's like green jelly in a tub. That's good for getting oil paint out of your hands. Or you could just be sensible and use a flip-in pair of gloves. Easy peasy. There we go. So the next thing we do is we get an absolute bucket ton of kitchen roll here, or kitchen towel, paper towel, whatever you want to call it. We're just going to rub this all over and remove the surface layer of grime and oil paint that we've built up here. And all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my God, this all makes sense. It looks so, so good already. So what I do here is I just go in circular motions on the flatter areas, and I go through an absolute ton of kitchen roll here, because you're going to need to. You can't just use the same piece over and over, because you're just going to rub the oil back onto the clean area that you've worked on. So you can actually press pretty hard here, because the whole point of that gloss varnish earlier was to seal in this paint so we can't scratch or damage the layer underneath. The other thing that it does, which I didn't actually highlight, is the fact that the oil paint won't interact with that layer underneath, and it won't sort of tan it or make it any darker in any way. So we've still got that lovely cold blue-gray coming through underneath, with the warmer brown tones over the top. So all we're going to do here is just work our way around the whole tile. Any areas we see where there is too much buildup of the oil paint, we'll just remove it with a clean paper towel. And this is quite a, it's a really, really satisfying process. The thing here is not to get sort of fingerprints on it. You can always keep wiping them off though, so it's fine. But I just love this process. It's so much fun. It's a lot easier to do on a flat tile like this. I have done lots of sort of pre-made tiles with multiple levels of terrain and walls and columns and stuff on them, and it is much harder to do this on a fully built tile that's all been stuck down, I must say. So to those of you who haven't done this yet, maybe do the base, the tile first before you actually glue everything down. And then maybe apply a little bit more afterwards. I think that's probably the way to go, and that's probably the way I'm going to do it next time. But as you can see, we've got some beautiful, beautiful patina here, which all comes from those natural abrasions and scratches that I was doing with the paper towel. The the rust is coming through underneath, and it's looking pretty fantastic. But however, we're going to take it one step further here, and I'm going to get out a bunch of pigment powders. Now, if you haven't used these before, they are exactly what they sound like. They are pigments in a powder form. So how you use them is entirely up to you. You can mix these things with water and create almost like a paste, which I have done in some of my hobby tutorials for basing and stuff. But in this case, we are going to apply them dry. Now, please note that I did actually dry the oil paint on the tile. Well, it's mostly dry. It still is a little bit, it moves around a bit in the crevices, but it's not so much of a problem because the way that I'm using these powders is fairly simple. Now, what I've got here is a sort of charcoal gray or almost black. I've got a rusty sort of orange, a lighter orange, a yellow, and a white. I'm going to start with the darker colors and work my way through them to the lighter colors. And again, I'm going to try and be as random as I possibly can be here. But again, human nature means that we don't do things randomly. It's hard for us to do this. So just pay attention to how much you're using. Don't go overboard. You can always add more. It's better to add not too much and then build up after, over time than just adding too much and then regretting it later because you can't take it off. So some of the sort of areas where I want it to be almost smoky or smoggy looking, especially around the grill in the middle there, and a bunch of other random areas, I'm going to apply the black. And I'm using a stippling motion with my brush. So I'm really trying to press it into those areas that I really want it to stick. If you just sort of sprinkle it on, like sugar on the top of a cake or whatever, it's just not going to do anything. It's not going to stay there. You really need to press it in. And that's really important that you do that. And what you can do as the powder sort of leaves the brush is you can almost feather it out around the edges so that those sort of fades start happening. And that's where it gets really, really nice looking. So what we're looking to do here is just almost peter it out to the edges using that stippling motion and getting a really, really nice effect here. You'll notice as well, I don't actually clean my brush. I quite like to go from dark to light because of that reason. If I went from light to dark, it's just not going to have the same sort of effect because I don't need to clean my brush as much, basically. So here we're just using a really old, yucky brush and stippling this into all of those fantastic looking areas to get some extra detail and rust. Now I'm onto the sort of mid-tone. This is the sort of rusty orange that I like to use so much. This is it's such a great pigment, this. I've been using this for my basing for quite a while now, for a number of years. I probably need to change it up at some point because, you get bored of your own processes after a while. Even though it does look fantastic, I just love this rich, bright orange that we get here. So again, not adding too much of this. This is probably my favorite color out of the bunch. It's just such a lovely, lovely orange. And then we're going to move on to the yellow. I really like the yellow as well. People overlook the yellow, I think, in terms of rust. If you go out there into the real world and you do a bit of a study on rust, you do get some really bright, vivid yellows when you look at really rusted iron and stuff. So using this yellow here, again, I'm going to just apply it in some random sort of areas, on some of the flatter areas as well, actually, because those areas can look a bit bland if you don't give them a little bit of attention with some of these pigments as well. We're now on to the white, which is a really, really pure white here. Again, you want to be very, very careful with this one because this is quite a strong one. I like to add just a tiny bit as it acts like almost like areas of sort of light, patches of light, and also areas where sort of like pale sort of dust would have built up. I just like the mixture between the dark and light here. We've got the white on the one end of the spectrum and the black as well, with all the browns and yellows and rusty colors in the middle. It just adds for a really nice overall effect. And again, remember that, you know, you don't have to be too detailed with this stuff because in the end, you're just going to plonk a ton of scenery on it anyway. So don't be too careful with this. Be creative and stuff, but just also, you know, don't go crazy with the amount that you put on this because the effect, you want to be able to see this from a distance and it looks good, but also up close it also looks good. So I then like to pick these tiles up and just give them a good hard blow. No innuendo there, folks, just a good hard blow. You could use a hairdryer if you like, or if you trust yourself and you're not going to inhale any of this powder, then just give it a nice, big, deep-chested blow. We're then going to get some water out, actually, and add a little bit of water to some of the areas where I want to make this sort of change its sort of behavior a little bit. Now what I'm going to do here is sort of stipple some water onto the areas, and what this does is it changes the property of the pigment and makes it, of course, more of a liquid or more of a paste almost, and you're able to play around with it in slightly different ways. What I'm doing here is kind of fading it in a little bit around the edges and blurring those areas between the darker and the lighter colors. It's quite a nice way of doing things if you want a little bit more emphasis in the creases and crevices, as you can see around the edges of this little square here. Just adding that little bit of extra water means that it builds up and you know, flows into those recesses a bit better. We're looking pretty good at this point, I think. The next step is the most expensive product that I'm going to be using here, and this is a Winsor & Newton Professional Matte Varnish. This cost me about 50 bucks, 50 or 60 bucks even from an art shop, and you might think that's super expensive, but it is worth it. It does three things. The first thing is it locks in all the pigments. It ties everything in together. The second thing is that it provides a layer of protection from your miniatures when you roll dice and whatnot. The third thing it does is it gets rid of that sheen that you might have had from the gloss varnish earlier, and it just ties everything in together in a really lovely, very, very, very matte sort of fashion, and it just looks wicked. Here comes my cat Bruce. He's coming to check things out. My boy Bruce. He's pretty happy with the results, and here are some of the tiles that I did earlier in the week. I've stuck some scenery on top of them that I did, you know, years earlier. I've actually done a separate tutorial for these walls and columns, but I'm really happy with the result. The two work very well together. I love the fact that I've gone very light and pale and muted with the tiles, and also much darker with the walls and columns. You get a really nice contrast there. And here is the finished tile. I'm really happy with the results. The patina looks excellent. You know, the combination of the dirty down rust, the oils, and of course the pigments, really, really popping off nicely. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, and support the channel further. I'll be back with another video real soon. Peace out.